Political leaders in Australia have warned there is a credible threat that tensions with China could lead to a deadly war. The world has been crippled by coronavirus, which was first identified in Wuhan and sent countries into a grinding economic halt. As America attempts to beat COVID-19 for good and spends trillions supporting its citizens, the next threat is growing in the background: China. In this special report, Sky News explores the terrifying threat of conflict with China, democracy's attempt to hinder the communist titan, and the worries over the capacity of President Joe Biden to prevent Beijing from achieving its plan for world leadership and the takeover of Taiwan. The head of the US Indo-Pacific Command, Admiral Philip Davidson, told the US Senate Armed Services Committee in March, ahead of a meeting between the leaders of the United States, Australia, India and Japan, that America and its partners were in danger of losing the arms race against China. Admiral Davidson said he felt at a disadvantage in the Indo-Pacific right now, and warned there was an imbalance of US forces in the region when it comes to China. In his statement, which caused serious concern across the globe, Admiral Davidson said Beijing wants to take Washington's leadership role by 2050 and invade Taiwan within 6 years.
Let me focus my remarks on the greatest long-term strategic threat to security in the 21st century: China. In stark contrast to our free and open vision, the Communist Party of China promotes a closed and an authoritarian system through internal oppression and external aggression. China's pernicious approach to the region includes a whole-of-party effort to coerce, corrupt, and co-opt governments, businesses, organizations, and the people of the Indo-Pacific. As China continues to increase the size of the People's Liberation Army and advance their own joint capabilities, the military balance in the Indo-Pacific is becoming more unfavorable for the United States and our allies. And with this imbalance, we are accumulating risk that may embolden China to unilaterally change the status quo before our forces may be able to deliver an effective response. In combination with everything that you just cited, Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and Tibet, and the line of actual control, and the South China Sea and the East China Sea, I worry that they're accelerating their ambitions to supplant the United States and our leadership role in the rules-based international order, which they've long said that they want to do that by 2050. I'm worried about them moving that target closer. Taiwan is clearly one of their ambitions before that, and I think the threat is manifest during this decade, in fact, in the next 6 years.
So in 6 years there could be war, pitting China against Taiwan, likely with the US, which could drag in its allies. 6 years marks a significant date for China, because 2027 will be the 100th anniversary of the People's Liberation Army. Liberal Senator Jim Mullen said the warnings about war with China should be taken very seriously.
I'm obligated to say that people know my position on China. China is very lacking in trust at the moment from many, many places in the world. Alan, war with China is not just possible because everyone's armed to the teeth, but it's more likely than so many people are prepared to admit. And I said recently that war could occur over various reasons within 3 to 5 years. I'm working myself to death to wake us all up, because that's what we've got to do.
I got to know Admiral Davidson pretty well. I think he speaks the truth. I think he knows precisely what it is that he is confronting there. We were the first administration for 40 years. Previous administrations had just kowtowed to China and had allowed them to continue their growth. We were the first ones to confront it. It is not easy. They're an enormous economic partner of the United States of America. But not only the military growth, but their efforts here inside the United States to steal all our intellectual property, all the things that the Trump administration confronted head on. I hope this administration will continue.
The Global Times, a Chinese propaganda mouthpiece, reported that by 2027, China aims to develop the military with the capacity to defend national sovereignty and safeguard against security threats. By 2027, Chinese military will have the ability to effectively deal with threats brought by the hegemonism and power politics in the Western Pacific region, including issues related to the Taiwan question and the South China Sea, as well as border tensions between China and India. According to a Beijing-based naval expert speaking to the Global Times, China wants to take Taiwan just like it did Hong Kong, crushed the region, shut down democracy, and ended free speech. And it consistently says there is no room for compromise on Taiwan, which it claims is its own territory.
I've had those conversations. We had those, and we saw that the Chinese Communist Party wasn't willing to give an inch. They talk about win-win. I only saw them advocate for win-lose, whether that was with respect to the genocide that's being conducted in Western China, whether it was the enormous broken promise to the people of Hong Kong, whether it was the threats that they were posing to Taiwan, or whether it was the virus that they allowed to travel across the world.
The two sides of the Taiwan Strait must be and will surely be reunified. This is a trend of history and the collective will of the entire Chinese nation. It will not and cannot be changed. The Chinese government's resolve to safeguard national sovereignty and territorial integrity is rock firm. We have the capability to thwart separatist attempts for Taiwan independence in whatever form. The One China principle is the political foundation of the China-US relationship, a red line that should not be crossed. On the Taiwan question, there is no room for compromise or concession from the Chinese government. We hope the new US administration will appreciate the great sensitivity of the Taiwan question and will abide by the One China principle and the 3 Sino-US communiques. We would hope to see a clear departure from the previous administration's dangerous practice of crossing the line and playing with fire, and we hope the Taiwan question will be handled prudently and properly.
Admiral Davidson told the same Senate committee that China is training for Taiwan's invasion. He said the People's Liberation Army conducts joint amphibious landing and maritime strike training to simulate a Taiwan invasion scenario, and performs large force maneuvers to demonstrate its ability to intervene in a Korean Peninsula crisis. The Admiral asked US Congress for billions in extra funds for new military construction and to boost cooperation with allies so that they could maintain an edge over China between 2022 and 2027.
The real kicker on this was that he said that his command, Indo-Pacific Command, needed $27 billion from Congress, he was talking to Congress, to enable him to deter China from acting against our interests. A US admiral who commands about 250,000 people and a significant proportion of the Earth's surface.
Around the same time as the Admiral's request, China revealed it would increase its official defence budget by 6.8% to $270 billion in 2021. That figure is about 4 times the defence budgets of India and Japan respectively, but it's just over a quarter of America's military spending. Australia's total defence budget for 2020 to 2021 was about $42 billion. President Xi has made modernising the People's Liberation Army a priority since he took over as General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party in 2012. At the end of last year, he warned his army to prepare for war, likely war with Taiwan and any country that tries to defend it. Since President Joe Biden replaced Donald Trump, China has increased what appears to be war preparations, between increases in military funding and rhetoric from the country's dictator. This year, China must appear especially strong, given July marks the Chinese Communist Party's centenary. In March, President Xi told a military session at the National People's Congress that China's current security situation was largely unstable and uncertain. He said the entire military must coordinate the relationship between capacity building and combat readiness, be prepared to respond to a variety of complex and difficult situations at any time, resolutely safeguard national sovereignty, security, and development interests. President Xi's remarks came after China's defense minister said the country needed to improve its capacity so it could prevail over our strong enemies. He said we must comprehensively improve military training and preparedness for battle. The great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation is at a critical stage, where we are facing unprecedented opportunities as well as unprecedented challenges. The concerns from the US Admiral and the fiery rhetoric from Xi Jinping and his defense minister came days before a virtual meeting of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue between the United States, Australia, Japan, and India, countries which see China as a common threat. It was the first meeting of the top leaders of the 4 countries in the loose coalition known as the Quad, and a significant step towards cementing a partnership of democracies and building a counterweight to China.
I would call it what President Biden said Australia was, and that is an anchor of peace and stability in the region. That's what it is. What the Quad is about is ensuring an open, independent, sovereign Indo-Pacific that enables all countries and nations within Indo-Pacific to engage with each other.
The Quad has never had its heads of government meet before. Experts are almost unanimous that the Quad has been summoned because President Xi has turned China into an openly aggressive power. Among other things, the Chinese president has hardened control over the supply chains of key industries and harassed neighbours at sea for territorial and energy gains. China has also gotten into a deadly fight over a border with India, kicked off a trade war with Australia, hacked the US government, and for years used its might to push Japan around on economic and military matters. Underneath the diplomatically chosen words of official statements from the Quad, there's a message to China. A new grouping of democratic nations has arrived. American officials and those representing other parties to the Quad have tried to pretend that the summit is not driven primarily by concerns about the threat from China. US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan sought to play down the issue when he said the Quad was not fundamentally about China. The Quad is not a military alliance. It's not a new NATO, despite some of the propaganda that's out there, he said.
The 4 leaders did discuss the challenge posed by China, and they made clear that none of them have any illusions about China. But today was not fundamentally about China. Much of the focus was on pressing global crises, including the climate crisis and COVID-19.
While the Quad statement didn't mention China by name, it's clear Chinese aggression is behind the meeting. The joint statement said, "We strive for a region that is free, open, inclusive, healthy, anchored by democratic values, and unconstrained by coercion."
It's not about any one country, but it is about the security and stability of the Pacific. And I'd be lying to you and your viewers if I didn't acknowledge that activities of the Chinese Communist Party, in particular in the South China Sea, have undermined security and stability in the Indo-Pacific. And that's of great concern to our fellow like-minded liberal democracies.
Right after the meeting, the four leaders, Morrison, Suga, Modi and Biden, put out an op-ed, a joint op-ed, in which it had the line that, it wanted nations in the Indo-Pacific to live without fear of coercion. Of course, who's coercing nations in the Indo-Pacific? There's one answer, it's China.
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken made clear days before the summit that the US would be using the heft of its alliances to take on China.
Our relationship with China will be competitive when it should be, collaborative when it can be, and adversarial when it must be. The common denominator is the need to engage China from a position of strength. That requires working with allies and partners, not denigrating them, because our combined weight is much harder for China to ignore. It requires engaging in diplomacy and in international organizations, because where we've pulled back, China has filled in. It requires standing up for our values when human rights are abused in Xinjiang or when democracy is trampled in Hong Kong, because if we don't, China will act with even greater impunity.
In the Washington Post, all 4 leaders of government combined to write a op-ed for the Washington Post this week about the Quad. But what you did see in this Washington Post article was a sentence that was sort of hidden in there that talked about the ideals that these 4 countries have in common. And then it said, and we welcome the participation of all those that follow these ideals as well. I thought that was one interesting line that said, hey, we're actually going to invite others to join this group. And that really does show that they might be able to might be trying to create a bloc of some kind to bulwark against China even further.
Increased coordination of the Quad countries on security matters has angered Beijing, which accuses the grouping of trying to contain China, denouncing it as an anti-China bloc. a Chinese foreign ministry spokesman said certain countries should shake off their Cold War mentality and ideological prejudice, refrain from forming closed and exclusive small circles.
I don't think there's anything inflammatory about like-minded countries working together to uphold the rules-based order, and in doing so we'll be upholding the interests of all the region and all of our neighbours. It'll be a very welcome news for our partners and friends in countries like Indonesia and the Philippines and Malaysia and in the Pacific, because they welcome our engagement in the region and they welcome us helping to uphold the architecture of the region, which supports the peace and prosperity and stability for all countries.
And in the Global Times, China downplayed the power of the Quad. It said the Quad will have an impact on Asian affairs, but after all, there are only 4 countries in the Quad. Asia is a very vast continent with many countries, so these 4 will not be able to influence the future development trend of Asia. As a matter of fact, most countries around the world are not worried about the rise of China, and most Asian countries do not see a so-called Chinese threat at all. Most countries see China's economic development, social stability, as well as achievements in COVID-19 epidemic prevention and control instead, and won't fully accept the narratives of the US. For them, China represents more of an opportunity than a threat.
For its part, China, during its National People's Congress last week, the Foreign Minister Wang said that this is just going to be another transient period for the Quad. Remember, historically, the Quad started in 2007, lost a lot of steam, and then picked up again only recently. I believed in his poetic imagery, he called it sea foam on the Indian Ocean or the Pacific that will soon disappear. So the question is, will the commitment follow the rhetoric?
So by this point, you're probably wondering what came out of the Quad. Well, a counter to China's influence.
With Indian manufacturing, US technology, Japanese and American financing, and Australian logistics capability, the Quad committed to delivering up to 1 billion doses to ASEAN, the Indo-Pacific, and beyond by the end of 2022.
The major achievement of the meeting, a plan to pump out vaccines to the region, is a constructive answer to Beijing's vaccine diplomacy. The Quad's vaccine plan will limit China's efforts to score diplomatic points by providing Chinese-made vaccines to countries. China has already delivered millions of doses of its domestically produced Sinovac to the region. But it will take more than vaccines to keep China from overtaking the US and dominating the Indo-Pacific. After all, COVID-19 spread from the Chinese city of Wuhan to the rest of the world and continues to ravage countries, particularly the US, bogging down productivity, allowing China to inch closer to its dream of taking Washington's leadership role by 2050 and invading Taiwan within the next 6 years. According to Blinken, China is now the only country capable of challenging the international order.
We will manage the biggest geopolitical test of the 21st century, our relationship with China. Several countries present us with serious challenges, including Russia, Iran, North Korea. And there are serious crises we have to deal with, including in Yemen, Ethiopia, and Burma. But the challenge posed by China is different. China is the only country with the economic, diplomatic, military, and technological power to seriously challenge the stable and open international system. All the rules, values, and relationships that make the world work the way we want it to, because it ultimately serves the interests and reflects the values of the American people.
The animating idea behind the Quad is that all 4 nations have a better chance of curbing China's aggression together rather than apart. How exactly they confront Beijing, though, was the group's long unanswered question.
There's a significant step now between the conversation that we saw over the weekend and a military alliance. You know, Japan is used to dealing with China, but compared to its GDP, it's fairly small. India may not want to get mixed up in a Taiwan scenario, although it might be happy to get mixed up in an Indian Ocean scenario. But I think the Quad is absolutely critical to us.
While members have emphasised the more benign aspects of the relationship, like the recent cooperation on the pandemic, the potential for military encirclement by the Quad countries has not gone unnoticed by Beijing. And it's no wonder. Admiral Davidson described the Quad grouping as a diamond of democracies in the Indo-Pacific. He said he hoped the organisation could build into something bigger, not in terms of security alone, but in terms of how we might approach the global economy, critical technologies like telecommunications and 5G, collaboration on the international order, just much to be done diplomatically and economically.
There's lots of areas for cooperation with like-minded countries when it comes to maritime security, to cyber security and critical infrastructure, to COVID-19, to climate change. There's a whole range of issues that we'll be cooperating with because we see the world in a very similar way to countries like Japan, India and of course the United States, our principal treaty ally.
Joe Biden's term as president will be pivotal to the outcome of China's growth. If Biden serves 2 terms, which is unlikely, it would mean he would be commander-in-chief when China comes for Taiwan, provided Admiral Davidson's warning about 2027 rings true. China has seen what many have witnessed in the West, Joe Biden's apparent signs of mental decline. An old man, the oldest president ever to enter office, who has seemed to struggle with memory, especially with names and numbers. A commander-in-chief who was unable to remember the name of his defense secretary, or take questions.
If they want to give a wave, I see him. Yeah. And then we also have SULLIVAN. We need you. And then if I could just.
Let's go, you guys. Come on, press. We're gonna move out. Let's go, press. Let's go. Come on, press. Let's go. Come on, let's go. Crisis at the border, sir. Let's go, you guys. Come on. Come on, let's go. Thank you, guys. Thanks so much.
I want to thank the former general. I keep calling him general, but the guy who runs that outfit over there. I want to make sure we thank the secretary. For Secretary of Health and Education Service, I nominated Javier Baccaria. You know, Javier Bashir, excuse me.
If Donald Trump is reelected, Freudian slip.
President Biden is now in charge of preventing China from succeeding with its ambitions, but many in America doubt the Democrat has what it takes. One survey found half of likely US voters believe Joe Biden is not physically and mentally up to the job of being president. Another poll found half of Americans are not confident in Biden's ability to deal with China. And a third poll found more than a third of Americans think Biden's policy towards China is either weak or too weak.
Representatives Shirley Jackson Lee, Al Green, Sylvia Garcia, Lizzie Pinelli, Pinell, and what am I doing here?
Philip Ritchie, Sky News.